Good morning, my children of the sun. Coming up on WHGE 95.3, The Open Eye.
Those of us that indulge in or commit intellectual violence don't do so for the pleasure of mental masturbation or ego diddling. We do so because the chains of oppression around people's minds are deep and difficult to remove.
Good morning, my children of the sun. Welcome to The Open Eye on WHGE 95.3 FM. I'm your host, Third Eye Optometrist Patrice Gibbs, here to get that third eye open. And as we always start, every generation has its purpose. Ours is to reveal the truth and reverse the brainwashing. And let me get my disclaimer out the way so we can get them going. All right. Where we at here? Oh. Give me a second. Okay. All right, get that disclaimer out the way.
The views and opinions expressed on The Open Eye are those of the hosts, guests, and contributors, and do not reflect the policy or position of WHGE 95.3 FM, nor our sponsor, the Delaware Center for Homeless Vets. Any content provided by Open Eye's hosts, guests, or contributors are theirs and are not intended to malign any religion, ethnic group, company, or individual.
All right. Hey, Sherry. Yes, indeed, we're going to get them started. All right, let's go with our opening commentary here. And before I do, Sherry, I told you I was going to use this because this is almost going to be the theme today. The word of the day is cranial rectumitus. Cranial rectumitus. That's when someone's head is shoved so far up their own ass they lose all connection to reality. Facts bounce off, logic gets ignored, and confidence stays sky high despite being dead wrong. Knows nothing, argues everything, and somehow thinks they're the smartest person in every room while everyone else is just waiting for them to shut up. Cranial rectumitus. Rectumitus. Yep. I got that from Sister Sherry. Let me ask you something before we get comfortable today. What does truth feel like when it finally hits you? Now, not what you've been told, not what's been repeated, not what's been trending. I'm talking about that moment when the illusion cracks and you realize you've been living inside a story written by someone else. See, we're living in an age where information is everywhere, but understanding is rare. Where people don't lack access, they lack analysis. Where headlines move faster than thought and outrage replaces investigation. They don't want you informed. They want you reactive. Because a reactive population is easy to steer, easy to divide, easy to exhaust. Turn on your television, fear. Scroll your phone, confusion. You listen to the political theater contradiction stack on contradiction. And somewhere in all that noise, the real question gets buried. Who benefits? Who profits? Who writes the narrative? And who gets written out of it? Because make no mistake, this isn't random. This is design. We are watching systems protect themselves in real time. We are watching power rearrange the chessboard while convincing the pawns they're making the moves. And the most dangerous thing in the world right now is not ignorance. It's comfortable ignorance. The kind that says, I don't want to know. The kind that laughs instead of listens. The kind that chooses distraction over truth, because truth demands responsibility, but not you. If you're tuned here, if you're tuned in, locked in, that means something in you is already rejecting the script. You're asking questions. You're connecting dots. You're seeing what others refuse to see. And that is where power begins. So today we're not just talking. We're not just listening. Today we're pulling threads. We're challenging narratives. We're opening eyes. Because once you see it, you can't unsee it. And once enough of us see it, the whole illusion collapses. Let's get into it. This is the Open Eye. Hey, Brother Freddie, I see you there. All right. All right. Let's get them started. WHGE 95.3 FM, the Open Eye. This is from Sister Sting Like a Bee. I like what she calls herself. She's a content creator on TikTok, I think it is. Yeah. When you didn't grow up Christian and your friend has to explain it to you like you're 5 years old. Yes, God loves you so much that he will burn you up for not loving him back. Now, that's pretty simple, actually. Because he created you as a sinner. Because he loves you. And he hates sin, okay? So he decided what was a sin and then put it inside you. And then you got to get it out, right? And so he said, I'll send my son and kill him. Because the sin I put in you, I don't like it. I hate it. And I'll burn you up for it. So he sent his son and then killed him. So he could get rid of the sin that he put in you. Because he hates it. But listen, because he loves you. And so he knew, though when he killed his son, that his son wasn't really dead. He was going to come back again. And when he came back, he was only going to be dead for like 3 days, right? From Friday to early Sunday morning. It's 3 days. It's 3 days. No matter what, you can count. It's 3 days. And so he knew that when he killed his son, he was only going to be dead for 3 days. And he is going to come back, right? So he was like, listen, son, you only got to die for a little while. But you can go to hell and get the keys to the pearly gate. Because they're locked. Because see, the security, okay, the devil had already been in heaven, okay? And he got kicked out. So they had to put the gates up and lock it. And that's where the keys was at. The devil had the keys to the gate, and Jesus had to go down there and get them. And he got them. And he brought them back. And he's in heaven with them. And he's going to come back for us when he gets done building our mansions. Because he's the great carpenter. And that's why he had to come to earth, so he could learn to do carpentry work. So he could build our mansions, and we could go be with him. And it's honestly it's really simple. But yes, he loves you so much that he puts sin in your heart that he hates, so that you could burn if you don't love him back. Yup. Now, what you just heard, that confusing, circular explanation, that's that satire pulled out of thin air. Yeah. And I see you, Sister Sherry. You know, how's it 3 days if he died Friday and rose Sunday? It's 3 days. They counted it. That's right. Yeah. And that's what Christianity sounds like when you step outside of it and then come back with fresh eyes after actually studying it. Not feeling it, not inheriting it, not defending it, studying. Because once you do, the language changes. All of a sudden, words like grace and salvation stop floating in soft light, and you start hearing the mechanics underneath. You start hearing this. A God creates human beings with a built-in flaw, calls that flaw sin, then declares that flaw worthy of eternal punishment. Yup. And then rather than simply removing the flaw, he requires a blood sacrifice to forgive what he designed. And not just any sacrifice. His own son, who is also himself, said to die to save you from himself. Now pause right there. Because if you heard that same structure in any other context, any other religion, any other story, you wouldn't call it divine. You would call it contradictory. But inside Christianity, it's called the mystery of faith. And that's where honest study begins, or that's where honest study begins to clash with inherited belief. Because when you're a child, you don't analyze the story, you absorb it. But when you study it as an adult, you start asking questions that don't have soft answers. Why create beings with a nature that you hate? Why demand punishment for what you authored? Why require suffering to grant forgiveness? Why is eternal torture the consequence for finite disbelief? And why does questioning any of this get labeled as rebellion instead of reasoning? See, what you heard earlier sounds absurd. Not because it was twisted, because it was flattened. All the poetic language stripped away, all the emotional music turned off, all the tradition removed. And what's left is the raw framework. And to many people, once they see that framework clearly, it doesn't sound like love anymore. It sounds like control. Explain gently. And that's the tension. Because for millions, Christianity is comfort, community, and meaning. But for others, especially those who step back and study it critically, it starts to sound like something else entirely. A system where belief is rewarded and doubt is punished. Not because the questions are invalid, but because the system depends on you not asking them questions too loudly. Now, whether you believe it or not is your choice. If you're going to believe it, you should at least be honest about what it actually sounds like when you take the training wheels off. This is the Open Eye. All right. Hey, Vaughn. I see you there, bro. Let's get back. WHGE 95.3 FM. The Open Eye. purge at the Pentagon. Come on. Come on, let's deal in facts, not feelings, not spin, not press briefings wrapped in patriotic wallpaper. Hey, Steve. All right. Pete Hegseth has reportedly removed 12 generals. 12. Between them, over 500 years of combined military experience. That's not a statistic. That's institutional memory. That's Gulf War, Iraq, Afghanistan. That's men who have seen war not on the screen, but through dust, blood, and consequence. Gone. No explanation, no strategic rationale, no public accounting. And let's be clear, this isn't trimming bureaucracy. These weren't desk-bound paper shufflers. These were war planners, field commanders, the people who understand what it actually means when someone casually says ground invasion of Iran. Because that phrase, that's not a headline. That's a logistical nightmare wrapped in geopolitical fire. So you have to ask the question nobody in power seems eager to answer. Why remove the people who know the cost of war right before you might choose to wage one? Now look at the contrast. The man overseeing this purge built his career at Fox News. A studio, not a command post. His battlefield was rhetoric. His weapons were talking points. His qualifications, confidence, charisma, and a camera-ready haircut. Yeah. Wait a minute. What was that you said, Sherry? Word of the day. What I do with it. I got it right here. Wait a minute. Here you go. Word of the day. Gosh, yeah. Wait a minute. What I do with that? Anyway, we know the word of the day is you got your head up your ass. And suddenly, Hegseth, whose own mama said he's trash, is the filter through which 500 years of military knowledge gets judged. That's not strategy, that's theater. Because when experienced generals start disappearing without explanation, replaced by individuals whose primary credential is loyalty, not competence, you're no longer strengthening the military. You're reshaping it into an echo chamber. And history is very clear about what happens next. When leadership values obedience over expertise, decisions stop being informed. They become insulated. Reality gets replaced with affirmation. And war, real war, not the kind discussed in studio segments. It doesn't care about loyalty tests. War punishes delusion. So now the question isn't just what happened. The question is, what did those generals know that made them inconvenient? Because you don't discard that level of experience in the middle of global tension unless it stands in the way of something you're trying to do. 500 years of hard-earned, battlefield-tested knowledge dismissed. Yeah, that's it. Cranial rectuminous. Yeah, I mean, you got your head up your ass. 500 years of hard-earned battlefield-tested knowledge dismissed, replaced with alignment. And if that doesn't concern you, it should. Because the cost of that kind of decision isn't paid in headlines. It's paid in lives. All right, let's take the gloves off. Because the conversation we keep avoiding is the one that matters most. We've been conditioned to treat nations like they're sacred, like they fell out the sky ordained by some divine hand. like questioning them is blasphemy. But let me remind you of something real simple. States are constructs. People are real. And no flag, no anthem, no government has a moral right to exist at the expense of human life. Is not real, does not have the right to exist. Now that might make some of you uncomfortable, but discomfort is where truth begins. Because what we're watching unfold right now is being dressed up in language that hides what it really is. We hear words like security and defense, retaliation. But when you strip the language down to the bone, what do you see? You see Palestine, a land where existence itself has been reduced to survival on borrowed time. Communities flattened, families erased, a people pushed further and further to the margins of their own homeland. And then the fire spreads. Is not real, does not have the right to exist. The fire spreads, strikes into Lebanon, not once, not twice, but repeatedly. Entire regions living under the shadow of bombs that can fall at any moment. And if you're listening closely, not to the headlines, but to the undertone, you hear something else. Expansion, not survival, expansion. Because when the conversation shifts from we must defend ourselves to we must reshape the region, now you're talking about something entirely different. Now you're talking about power. You're talking about influence. You're talking about the age-old story that has been told on every continent since the beginning of recorded history. The strong deciding that the weak do not get to remain. And don't think for 1 second that this is happening in isolation, because every missile, every bomb, every escalation has a financial signature attached to it. And that signature leads right back to where? The United States. Because the United States funds it, arms it, and justifies it. While people right here, right where you're listening from, are told there's no money for schools, no money for housing, no money for health care. Americans are told to tighten their belts while billions flow outward to sustain conflicts that don't make nobody safer, don't make the world more stable, and sure as hell don't make us more moral. So when somebody asks, do you believe Israel has the right to exist? Understand something. That question is designed to trap you. Because it forces you to choose between existence and opposition. The real issue is, what kind of existence are we talking about? An existence that coexists or existence that consumes? An existence that respects borders or one that redraws them with bombs? An existence that values human life or one that calculates it? Because if your existence requires the erasure of another people, then what you're defending is not a right, it's a system of domination. And history has shown us over and over again, systems of domination don't last forever. Empires rise, empires expand, empires convince themselves they are untouchable, and then they fall. Not because outsiders suddenly became stronger, but because the moral rot inside finally caught up with the power on the outside. So no, this is not about denying existence. This is about rejecting the ideal that anybody gets to exist by destroying everybody else. That's not a right, that's a violation. And if we don't have the courage to say that clearly, without fear, without hesitation, then we are not witnesses to history. We are accomplices to it. Hell no. Israel not or is not real does not have the right to exist. This is the Open Eye. I'm Patrice Gibbs. WHGE 95.3 FM. This is the Open Eye. Let's go to Africa. Burkina Faso did something that sent a shockwave through the global order. Under the leadership of Ibrahim Traoré, they shut down American and Israeli embassies, labeling those nations not as partners, not as allies, but as terrorist states. Now, whether people agree or disagree with that label isn't the point. The question is, what produces that level of distrust? Because this didn't come out of nowhere. From the perspective of many nations in the global south, diplomacy with powers like the United States is not real, doesn't always look like negotiation. It looks like a performance with a predetermined ending. Agreements get written, red lines shift, and sometimes, even while talks are happening, actions on the ground tell a completely different story. So when Burkina Faso acts, it's not just about symbolism. It's about a growing belief that sovereignty is conditional in a world dominated by stronger powers. And here's the uncomfortable truth. If a nation believes that treaties won't be honored, if it believes negotiations can be undercut at any moment, if it believes embassies are not just diplomatic centers but potential leverage points where coups are planned, then closing those embassies becomes, in their eyes, not radical, but logical. This is where the analogy hits. Dealing with unreliable power starts to feel like Charlie Brown and the football. You already know how that ends. But you're expected to keep playing the game anyway. Meanwhile, alliances like the alliance of Sahel states are forming, signaling something deeper, a shift away from reliance on Western power structures and toward regional self-determination. Now here where it gets real. We love to talk about peace. Oh, Americans put it in speeches, wrap it in policy language, sell it as if it's the ultimate goal. But where some nations stand, peace isn't being negotiated, it's being managed under pressure. And when a country believes it's already operating inside a system tilted against it, it stops asking for peace and it starts preparing for survival. So the real question isn't whether Burkina Faso went too far. The real question is this: what kind of global behavior makes a nation believe that shutting doors is the only way to protect itself? Because once countries stop believing in diplomacy, they start playing. They stop playing like by diplomatic rules. And when that happens, you're not heading toward peace. You're already living in the early stages of something else. Colonialism. This question came up. Will the rest of the world ever forgive America for electing Donald Trump? That's the question floating across oceans, whispered in embassies, spoken plainly in foreign capitals. But let's be clear, this was never about forgiveness. It's about trust. Because what the world saw wasn't just one man rise to power. They saw a system that allowed it. They saw millions who demanded it. And more importantly, they saw how little resistance there was to even stopping it. Japan looks at America and says, this wasn't an anomaly. This is a pattern waiting to repeat. Translation: any deal with the United States now comes with a warning label. The Netherlands, they're not focused on one man. They're looking at the tens of millions who stood behind him saying, that doesn't disappear overnight. Trust, once broken at that scale, doesn't come back with a new election cycle. It takes generations, if it comes back at all. France cut deeper. They're not asking how he got elected. They're asking why nothing. No institution, no safeguard, no moral line stopped him. To them, that signals something far more dangerous. Not dysfunction, but lawlessness dressed up as democracy. And then there's Great Britain. Cold, historical, almost clinical. Sure, the world forgave Germany, but notice what's embedded in that comparison. Forgiveness came after devastation, after collapse, after consequence. History doesn't hand out forgiveness cheaply. And right now, America looks less like a stable republic and more like what France described: a crumbling empire. Arrogant, deaf to the world's anger, convinced of its own invincibility. But here's the part that should hit hardest. Empires don't fall because outsiders are stronger. They fall because something inside rots. Corruption, division, delusion, a refusal to confront reality. And that's the pattern every time. So the real question isn't, will the world forgive America? The real question is, will America confront itself? Because you can't negotiate trust abroad while ignoring truth at home. And until that mirror gets some honest use, the rest of the world ain't waiting for no goddamn apology. They're adjusting to a new reality. An America that can no longer, or never should have been, taken at its word. This is the Open Eye. WHGE 95.3 FM. This is the Open Eye. All right. I had this from Joe Renee. Okay. Sister Joe Renee. Welfare fraud. There's a journalist named Tyler Oliveira. He has done what I'm going to call an expose, because that's exactly what he's doing. He's done a documentary series on welfare fraud amongst Hasidic Jews in upstate New York. He went into the neighborhood and discovered literally entire swaths of Hasidic Jewish population that live almost solely off of government welfare. The men do not work. They pray and study the Torah all day. The women work a little bit, and they all have 7, 8, 9, 10 children, all funded by government funds, by our taxpayer money. Now, I found this to be really interesting. They're very defensive. They have been trying to put him out of their neighborhood. I'm talking about Tyler Olivier. They have called the police on him. They actually have their own police force in the area that is basically saying, hey, these people don't want you here because they don't want you to know what's happening. They were even able to block vote to take over the local board of education, the school board, and funnel public funds to private Jewish schools, thus leaving that area having to close schools because they are short on funding. Listen to what I'm saying here. The Hasidic Jewish population in upstate New York engaged in block voting in order to win seats on a school board that they do not participate in, because their children go to private schools. But what they were able to do is divert the funding from that community into their private Jewish schools. That's what's happening in upstate New York. And I find this to be very fascinating because for decades, the government tried to convince you that the welfare queens were generationally provided black women. And of course, that's not true. The welfare queens are the Hasidic Jewish population in upstate New York. Yeah. And people are reacting to this. Some are saying, hey, you should come to New Jersey and see it. You should come here because it's rampant. They have not only figured out how to abuse the system, but they are now retaliating because Tyler Olivier, his funding, he's been deplatformed from his funding for exposing this rampant abuse in the Hasidic Jewish community in New York. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now, the welfare queen trope is one of the most enduring and powerful examples of political myth-making in American history. It fundamentally reshaped public policy by centering a specific racialized image of fraud that often contradicted the actual data regarding social safety nets. The term gained national prominence in the 1970s, specifically during Ronald Reagan's 1976 campaign, "May roast in hell and may the devil sodomize him with a pitchfork." While it was loosely based on a real person, all right, the story was used to generate or generalize an entire class of people. When looking at where the most significant leakage of taxpayer funds occurs, the data suggests that individual welfare fraud, while it exists, is just a drop in the bucket compared to the other forms of systemic abuse. Corporate subsidies and tax loopholes. Economists point out that the largest recipients of government favor aren't individuals but corporations. Right? Companies like Walmart and various fast food chains have historically paid wages so low that their full-time employees still qualify for SNAP and Medicaid. In this sense, taxpayer dollars are effectively subsidizing the payroll expenses of billion-dollar corporations. Tax non-compliance. The tax gap, the difference between taxes owed and taxes paid, is estimated by the IRS to be hundreds of billions of dollars annually, largely driven by underreporting of high-income individuals and complex corporate sheltering. The administrative scrutiny placed on SNAP recipients is often far more rigorous than that placed on corporate entities. Far more. Statistically, the so-called welfare queen falls apart when looking at the real numbers. The largest group, historically and currently, the largest group of SNAP and Medicaid recipients are white people. It's more of them. The working poor, the vast majority of people receiving government assistance are either children, the elderly, the disabled, or the working poor, and people that work at Walmart and fast food joints where the government is subsidizing their salary. People are employed and not earning enough to make a living. The persistence of welfare queen narrative often serves as a distraction from larger fiscal issues. By focusing public anger on the poorest members of society, which is often through a racial or religious lens, the conversation shifts away from corporate welfare, tax evasion by the wealthy, and systemic wage stagnation. While fraud within any specific community, such as the Hasidic Jews in New York, should be addressed through law enforcement, it is statistically an outlier compared to the broader economic drains on the American tax system. But while this goes on, don't you dare forget that the same people in upstate New York help push the myth of the welfare queen. It is not real, does not have the right to exist. It's the open eye. WHGE 95.3 FM. Oh, wait a minute. Yeah. Tell y'all something. You know, it's a real bitch when somebody live rent free in your head, ain't it? Yeah. Let me walk you through this. Okay, I was reading what was described as a new government agreement with Iran. Now I'm looking at the terms. 11 tons of enriched uranium gone. 13,000 centrifuges dismantled. Enrichment capped at 3.67%. Inspectors with access to everything, even undisclosed sites. And I said to myself, damn, that's airtight. That's strategy. That's leverage. That's what a real agreement looks like. And then I looked again, and I realized something. That ain't new. That's not new. That's the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. The Iran deal negotiated under Barack Obama. Let that sit with you. Everything being praised right now as strong, disciplined, and effective was already done, and it worked. Not according to one side or the other, but according to the international inspectors and even reports coming out of the State Department under Donald Trump. Iran was in compliance. So now the real question is not what the deal was. The question is why it got destroyed. And I'm going to say it plain, because Barack Obama lives in Donald Trump's mind rent-free. This ain't about policy. This is personal. Anything with Obama's name on it had to go. It didn't matter if it worked. It didn't matter if it made the country safer. It didn't matter if it gave the United States leverage. If it reminded the world that Obama was effective, had to be erased. That's not leadership, that's insecurity. Because when you're competing with a ghost, you stop governing the living. And what happened after that? After that deal got torn up, within a year, Iran starts wrapping back up. The leverage shifts, the stability disappears. And now the same problem that was contained is back on the table bigger. Now you don't have, now you don't have a pinned solution anymore. Now you're starting to hear the drums. Military options, escalation, pressure. Because when ego destroys diplomacy, force becomes the fallback. And let me be clear, this didn't happen because the deal failed. It happened because somebody couldn't stand the fact that it succeeded under somebody else's name. That's the cost of letting ego run foreign policy. And the most ironic part, Barack Obama didn't have to say a goddamn word. His record speaks for him. Every time the situation comes back around, that's what rent-free looks like. This is the open eye. We're going to keep it moving. All right. Let's go back a little bit here. Because it's going to lead into, All right. What happened in 1926 in Winston-Salem wasn't just a clever workout. It was a direct response to a system designed to humiliate, restrict, and economically suffocate black people under Jim Crow laws. Let me tell you what I'm talking about here. By the 1920s, transportation across the South wasn't just segregated, it was controlled. Black riders were often forced to sit in the back, denied access altogether during peak hours, and subject to arbitrary rules meant to degrade. In Winston-Salem, black citizens didn't just face inconvenience, they were locked out of mobility. And mobility is power. Without transportation, you can't reliably work, build, or circulate money. Well, instead of protest alone, the community chose economic self-determination. In just 30 days, 21 black entrepreneurs raised the equivalent of millions in today's dollars. That wasn't luck. That was trust within the community, circulating black capital internally, and a shared understanding that survival required ownership. They launched the Safe Bus Company, and what followed was nothing short of industrial scale resistance. 80+ buses operating daily. Thousands of riders served consistently, expansion into taxis and related services. And this wasn't a side hustle. This was parallel infrastructure. We're going to talk about that. A fully functioning system built because the existing one was hostile. Yeah. The Safe Bus Company represents a pattern that we've seen throughout black history. When excluded, build your own. When blocked, redirect the flow of money. When denied dignity, create institutions that enforce it. That is the same spirit behind Black Wall Street, the rise of black banks, and the insurance companies. The mutual aid societies that predate government safety nets. These weren't symbolic victories, these were economic ecosystems. Okay? And let me tell you, that bus company lasted for years until past Jim Crow, to the extent that the state bought them out. That's how we operate. WHGE 95.3 FM. Open eye. Hey, Brother Gary, Brother Jafar. all right. WHGE 95.3 FM. This is the Open Eye. Okay. Let me tell you about the blueprint of resistance. We often hear about the struggle in abstract terms, but today we're looking at the receipts. We're talking about the specific systemic hurdles placed in the path of Black America, from the end of the Civil War straight through to the modern day. It wasn't just one obstacle. It was legislative and social gauntlet. Let's talk about the wealth gap. It didn't just happen. While the GI Bill was building the white middle class after World War II, Black veterans were largely excluded. At the same time, the FHA, the Federal Housing Association, was literally drawing red lines around our neighborhoods. Literally. We know that is redlining. It meant no loans, no investment, and the deliberate suppression of home equity. And for those who did find success, we saw the destruction of over 60 Black towns. When we built our own Wall Streets, like in Tulsa, they were burned to the ground. This isn't just history, it's stolen inheritance. Let's talk about the legal track. When slavery ended, the system pivoted. Black codes criminalized being unemployed, which fed the convict leasing system, essentially slavery by another name. This paved the way for Jim Crow and eventually the mass incarceration crisis we see today. We transitioned from the physical chains of the 1800s to the policy chains of the war on drugs and the crack epidemic, which we now know had deep, dark ties to federal agencies pumping drugs into our community. The war on leadership. It wasn't just laws. It was the targeting of the mind and the heart. COINTELPRO was a shadow war fought by the FBI to prevent the rise of a messiah. They didn't just watch our leaders, they destabilized them. From assassinations of Malcolm and Martin to the media demonization that turns victims into villains on the evening news, the goal was simple: disrupt unity. The reason we list these isn't to dwell on the pain, it's to marvel at the survival. To look at this list, land theft, sundown towns, police lynchings, and realize that despite a century-long effort to dismantle Black progress, the community is still standing, still demanding, and still rising. Okay, we're going to dive deeper. The education and geography of exclusion. This is the infrastructure of control. We have to look at the environment we were forced to navigate. School segregation wasn't just about sitting in different classrooms. It was a resource war. It was a deliberate attempt to underfund the Black mind. And what I tell you, my mother told you. Desegregate the resources. And while we fought for our children's education, we were navigating a physical map of danger. Think about sundown towns. Entire jurisdictions where your safety expired at 6 p.m. That kind of terror wasn't just the South, it was nationwide. It was a message that said, you can work here, but you cannot belong here. This is physical exclusion combined with land theft from black farmers. It was designed to keep us landless and mobile, never able to plant roots or build a family estate. The modern evolution. Now people ask, why are we still talking about this? We talk about it because the tactics evolve. We move from the rope to police lynching, extrajudicial killings that often go unpunished under the color of law. We move from open mockery of minstrel shows to media demonization. Look at how the news covers a crisis in our community versus others. When we see the thug narrative or the super predator myth, that's a direct descendant of the propaganda used to justify the black codes in 1865. It's the same goddamn playbook, just a higher definition screen. Let's recap the gauntlet. They took the land. They denied the loans. They burned the towns. They targeted the leaders. They flooded the streets with drugs and the prisons with our people. And yet, the culture is the most influential on the planet. The brilliance is unmatched. The resilience is the eighth wonder of the world. Let me say that again. The resilience of black people in America, of the African in America, the formerly enslaved, the prisoner of war, the resilience of these people is the eighth wonder of the world. If they had to do all that just to try and hold us back, imagine what happens when we fully break the cycle. Knowledge is the first step in that break. Let me tell you about the architecture of resilience. The economic underground. We talked about realigning the FHA denial. Well, let's talk about the counter move. When the banks closed their doors, Black America opened its own. We're talking about the rise of black fraternal organizations and mutual aid societies. See, before modern insurance, we had burial societies and benevolent associations. We pooled our pennies to ensure that even in a system designed to strip us of dignity, we took care of our own. That's the origin of the black banking system, an economic fortress built out of necessity. When they stole the land, we created land trusts and cooperatives. We didn't just survive the exclusion, we built a parallel economy. Education was an act of rebellion. Excuse me. They tried to use school segregation to create a permanent underclass. But look at the strategy behind the Rosenwald schools or the foundation of our HBCUs. When the state refused to build schools for black children, the community raised the money themselves. They bought the bricks, they cleared the land, they hired the teachers. Education wasn't just learning, it was an act of political rebellion. We turned churches into classrooms by day and strategy centers by night. That's how you navigate a system that wants you unlearned. You make the pursuit of knowledge a sacred duty. Navigating the map, the green book strategy. Think about them sundown towns we mentioned. How did we move? How did we migrate? We created the green book. It wasn't just a travel guide, it was a survival map. It was a network of safe harbors, black-owned motels, restaurants, and private homes that allow families to move across a hostile landscape without being lynched or arrested. It was the original GPS for freedom. It shows that every wall they built, we found a door or we built a ladder. And let me tell you about the power of the press. When media demonization was the only thing the world saw, we launched the black press, the Chicago Defender, the Pittsburgh Courier, the Amsterdam News, the Wilmington Spectator, the Wilmington Gazette, the Delaware Spectator. These weren't just newspapers. They were the internet before the internet. They told the truth about lynchings. They organized the Great Migration, and they gave a voice to the voiceless. They countered the lies of the state with the lived reality of the people. We took control of our own narrative because we knew if you don't tell your story, the enemy will. And the blueprint is internal. So when you look at that list of black clothes and mass incarceration, don't just see a victim, see a strategist. See a people who took the scraps of a broken system and forged a culture that the whole world now tries to imitate. Our history isn't just a list of what was done to us. It's a masterclass in what was done in spite of it. If we could build Wall Streets, universities while being hunted, imagine what we can do when we finally stop asking for permission to thrive. We built a parallel economy. Let me talk about that. The spine of that economy, the successful, legitimate businesses that we excelled, that supported the community, provided employment, and the progress of our people. And don't exclude the underground economy, the underground segment of our economy, the successful illegal businesses and their role in that parallel economy. If we brought back the numbers but made it a community investment fund, what will we build in 5 years? Okay? To talk about the spine of the black community, to talk about the spine of the black parallel economy is to talk about a masterclass in circular economics. Because the white-dominated market was closed. $1 spent in the black community had to stay there, after circulating dozens of times before leaving. This created an ecosystem where the legitimate and the underground weren't just neighbors. They were often business partners in our struggle for progress. You want to know how we survived the economic lockdown? Look at the industries where we didn't just participate, we dominated. The insurance titans. Because white firms wouldn't insure black bodies, we built giants like North Carolina Mutual. These weren't just businesses. They were the community war chest. They provided the capital for home loans that the FHA refused to touch. The beauty and grooming empire. Think Madam C.J. Walker and Annie Turnbull Malone. They didn't just sell hair care. They created a national franchise of independent black women. The beauty shop became the community's town square and its primary source of female employment and entrepreneurship. The black press and publishing. Beyond the news, companies like Johnson Publishing, Ebony and Jet, created a visual economy. They showed black excellence when the world showed caricatures. They provided high-level corporate careers in marketing, photography, and journalism. The service industry infrastructure, black-owned hotels, funeral homes, and catering businesses were the high-margin winners. In a segregated world, everyone still needed a place to stay, food to eat, and a dignified way to be laid to rest. And we provided that. Now let's talk about the underground economy. Yeah. Let's talk about the parallel economy without talking about the street finance. We can't talk about that without talking about street finance. Before the lottery was run by the state, it was run by the neighborhood. I know, because I used to run numbers. The number queens and kings, figures like Casper Holstein in Harlem, or Stephanie St. Clair, Bumpy Johnson. The numbers racket was effectively the community's unofficial bank. And here's the part the history books leave out. The illegal money from the numbers often funded the legal progress. Number runners paid for kids to go to college. They provided the seed money for black jazz clubs and restaurants that couldn't get a bank loan. The policy bank, when a black family was facing eviction because of a late check, it wasn't the Chase Bank they went to. It was the local policy king, the numbers runner. This underground segment provided a safety net and liquid capital that the formal economy strictly denied us. Now, how did the two worlds meet? This is the secret sauce, the synergy. The legitimate business owners and the underground entrepreneurs lived on the same block. They sat in the same pews on Sunday. The money from the street helped keep the storefronts open during the lean years of the Depression. Our people actually made out better during the Depression than most white Americans. When a black doctor wanted to open a clinic but was denied credit, it was often a numbers king who handed him the cash under the table. They understood something. We are relearning today. Economic survival is a team sport. It doesn't matter where the capital came from as long as it was being used to build the community's collective power. So what happened to the spine? Well, integration. Integration was a moral victory, but it was an economic ambush. When we gained the right to spend our money in white stores, we stopped spending in our own. The parallel economy began to leak. And before you're too hard on our people, you have to look at our people like a child that was raised in a very strict household. When they finally were free, they went buck wild. They couldn't wait to get out the house. Now, the lesson isn't to go back to segregation, but to go back to intentionality. We need to look at our ancestors who built banks in basements and empires in beauty shops. They knew that a community without its own economy isn't a community, it's a consumer base. We had the blueprint then. It's time to dust it off and rebuild the spine. If we brought back the numbers game, but made it a community investment fund today, what could we build in 5 years? In the old days, the numbers worked because it was a high volume, low barrier, and local. If we apply that same logic to a modern community improvement ecosystem, we aren't just talking about a lottery. We're talking about collective capital. How the modern numbers ecosystem will work. To build this in 5 years, you need a 3-tier system: the collection, the trust, and the cycle. The collection, low barrier, high volume. Instead of a hit, the buy-in is micro investment. Just imagine if 10,000 people in a community commit just $10 a week, the price of a cup of coffee or a few lottery tickets. That funds generates $5.2 million in a year. The incentive, a portion still goes to the winner, the hit. But the house take, which used to stay with the banker, now goes to the community trust, the tech. This is managed via a transparent blockchain or community-owned app. We use the technology, ensuring that every cent is accounted for, unlike the old days where you had to trust the runner. The trust, the community bank. This is the spine we talked about. The 5.2 million isn't just sitting there. It's being deployed as patient capital, giving out interest-free business loans, funding the next generation of legitimate pillars, the grocery stores, the tech hubs, and the medical clinics. Property acquisition. The fund buys distressed land and commercial buildings before outside developers can gentrify the neighborhood. The community becomes its own landlord. Educational endeavors. Just like the old number runners pay for neighborhood kids' tuition, this fund provides success grants that don't need to be paid back, keeping the community's brightest minds from being crippled by debt. The cycle, the multiplier effect. This is where the ecosystem becomes self-sustaining. When the business is funded by the trust grow, they commit to hiring from the community and banking within the community fund. Excuse me. The dollar that used to leave the neighborhood in 6 hours now stays for weeks. The outcome, within 5 years, you haven't just built a fund, you built a closed loop economy. Sound familiar? Look around you. That's what we need. We need to build a closed loop economy. Now imagine it's 5 years from the day. We didn't wait for a federal grant. We didn't wait for a bank that redlined us for 80 years to change its heart. We went back to the policy model, but we brought it into the 21st century. By year 2, our modern numbers fund has brought back the corner store and turned it into a healthy market. By year 3, we provided the seed money for 10 black-owned tech startups. By year 5, we aren't just living in the neighborhood, we own the goddamn neighborhood. This is the shift from being a consumer to being a shareholder in your own culture. The numbers was never about the gambling, it was about the liquidity. It was about having cash on hand when the system said you shouldn't have any. We're talking about that survival tactic and turning it into a blueprint for liberation. See, the beautiful irony is that the very system used to criminalize our neighborhoods, the gambling laws, the policy reins, is the same energy we can use to fund our own salvation. We don't need to find the money. The money is already in our pocket. We just need to change the direction it's flowing. We survived the black codes, redlining. Now let's build the green code, a code of economic loyalty that ensures our grandchildren never have to ask for a loan from a hand that once held a whip. What's your number for today? Huh? You got $5, $10? Think about what that grows when it's planted in your own soil. This is the Open Eye. I'm Patrice Gibbs. Planning for the future. WHGE 95.3 FM. Oh, WHGE 95.3 FM. Didn't have the mic on. Well, just like that, we come to the end of another journey, my children of the sun. But let me leave you with this. The truth is not always comfortable. In fact, most of the time it ain't. Truth disrupts. Truth unsettles. Truth forces you to reevaluate everything you thought you knew. But here's the part they don't tell you. Truth also frees you. Because once you understand the game, you stop playing it the same way. You stop reacting to every distraction. You stop arguing over crumbs while someone else owns the bakery. And you stop mistaking noise for knowledge. And you start asking better questions. Not what did they say, but why did they say it? Not what happened, but who needed it to happen that way. That's the shift. That's the awakening. And understand this. This is not about agreeing with me. This is not about adopting another voice. This is about sharpening your mind so nobody can think for you. Because the moment you hand over your ability to question, you handed over your freedom. So as you move through your day, I want you to observe more, listen deeper, question everything, even me, especially me. Because the goal here is not followers, the goal is thinkers. I hope you learned something today, because I learned something before I got here. And as we always tell you, destiny determines who enters your life, but you decide who stays. Therefore, value those who value you, and don't treat those as a priority who treat you as an option. This is The Open Eye on WHGE 95.3 FM. I'm your host, Patrice Gibbs. Thanks for joining us. Peace. All right. Like I said, thanks for joining us. Like I always tell you, global African supremacy. Remember our influence. That global African supremacy can start right here, because the world was a much better place when the African ruled. I'm Patrice Gibbs.